You know the moment I am talking about. The conversation was flowing. She was texting back fast, laughing at your jokes, asking you questions about your life. The chemistry was undeniable. And then, out of nowhere, the messages slow down. The replies get shorter. A day passes, then two. You start checking your phone every 10 minutes, refreshing an app that is not going to refresh anything new, because the truth is, she has not opened your last message, and you know it. And somewhere in that silence, a question starts eating at you that you do not want to admit out loud. Did I do something wrong? Or is this just what happens to me every single time? If you have ever felt that knot in your stomach, that creeping anxiety that tells you something is slipping away, you are not alone. Most men have been there. The difference between those who stay stuck in that cycle and those who break free is not luck. It is not about being more attractive or more successful. It is about understanding the deeper dynamics at play and learning to respond from a place of strength rather than fear. Let us start with the silence itself, because it is the thing that breaks most men first. When a woman goes quiet, most men assume the worst immediately. They assume rejection. They assume she has lost interest. They assume she is talking to someone else. They assume the connection they thought they had was imaginary. And because that assumption feels unbearable, they do the one thing guaranteed to make it worse. They chase. They send a follow-up message, then another one, framed as casual, as if a second message erases the first. They start narrating their own anxiety without realizing it. "Hey, no worries if you are busy." That is a sentence that fools nobody, least of all the person reading it, because underneath those polite words is a scream. "Please respond to me. Please tell me I still matter. Please make this feeling go away." The Stoic philosopher Epictetus understood this impulse well. He wrote that we are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of them. The silence itself is not the problem. It is the story you tell yourself about the silence that causes the suffering. And that story is almost always worse than the reality. Here is what almost nobody tells you. Silence is not always rejection. Sometimes it is a test, whether the woman is doing it consciously or not. She is watching to see what you do with the space she has created. Does the space unsettle you so much that you fill it immediately with proof of your own need? Or can you hold it, breathe through it, and keep living your life without turning her silence into a 5-alarm emergency? This is not about pretending you do not care. It is about actually not needing her response to feel like a complete person in the meantime. There is a massive difference between those two things, and almost every man confuses them at some point. Pretending is a performance, and performances crack under pressure. Actually not needing the response is a state you arrive at because your sense of worth was never built on her replying in the first place. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Her silence is an outside event. Your reaction to it is within your power. That is where your strength lies. Think about the people in your life who never seem rattled. Maybe it is a boss, a mentor, an older relative. Someone who, when things go sideways, does not spiral. They pause. They think. They respond instead of react. That quality is not a personality trait some people are born with and others are not. It is a skill built through the accumulation of 1,000 small decisions to not let an external event dictate an internal state. And it is exactly the skill that determines whether silence from a woman destroys your week or barely registers as a blip. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote that nothing is a better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company. When you can sit with your own thoughts, when you can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing, you become unshakable. And that unshakable quality is what makes you magnetic. Now, I want to be honest with you about something because a lot of content out there will not be. There is a temptation, when you start learning about attraction and psychology, to slide into a worldview where women are the enemy. Calculating, manipulative, running elaborate tests designed to trip you up. That worldview is seductive because it gives you someone to blame, but it is also mostly wrong. And worse, it is a trap that keeps you exactly where you do not want to be. Reactive, suspicious, and still fundamentally focused on decoding her instead of building yourself. The truth is simpler and less dramatic than the conspiracy version. Most people, men and women both, are drawn to certainty and repelled by neediness. That is not a female trait. It is a human one. You feel it too. Think about the last time a friend called you 5 times in an hour because they were anxious about something minor. Did not some part of you want to create distance, even if you cared about them? That instinct is not cruelty. It is a natural response to someone else's unregulated emotional state landing on your doorstep and demanding you manage it for them. So when a woman pulls back from a man who is anxious, who over-explains, who apologizes for things that do not need apologies, who responds to every message within 90 seconds like he has been sitting there waiting, she is not running a manipulation playbook. She is having the same instinctive reaction you would have to anyone of any gender who hands you their anxiety and asks you to hold it. The problem was never that she is testing you unfairly. The problem is that the anxiety was real, and she could feel it. This is the part where I need you to actually sit with something uncomfortable. The goal was never to learn how to hide your anxiety better. Men try that first because it is the shortcut. They think if they just do not send that second text, if they just wait 3 hours to reply instead of 3 minutes, she will not be able to tell. But she can tell. People are extraordinarily good at sensing the difference between calm and performed calm, even when they cannot articulate why. A man who is faking detachment radiates a different frequency than a man who has actually built a life solid enough that her silence does not threaten it. You cannot fake your way to the second one. You have to build it. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote that no great thing is created suddenly, and the kind of groundedness that keeps you steady when someone pulls away is no exception. It is built through the accumulation of small choices, each one building on the last. Each time you choose to focus on your own life instead of her silence, you build that groundedness. Each time you choose to breathe through the discomfort instead of reacting, you build that groundedness. And as you build it, it becomes part of who you are. So let us talk about how you build it, because this is where the real work is, and it has almost nothing to do with women at all. Ask yourself honestly, if she never texted back, if this thing fizzled out completely tomorrow, what would be left of your life? Not what would be left of your hope for this particular relationship. What would be left of you? Your mornings, your goals, your friendships, your sense of forward motion. If the honest answer is not much, if her attention has quietly become the organizing principle around which your days are structured, then you have found the actual problem, and it was never about her silence. It was about the size of the hole her attention was filling. This is the uncomfortable diagnosis a lot of men avoid because it is easier to analyze her behavior than to examine your own emptiness. It is easier to ask, what does this text mean, than to ask, why does a single unanswered message have the power to hijack my entire mood? But the second question is the one that actually changes your life. The first one just keeps you stuck in analysis, refreshing a thread, waiting for a stranger's phone to light up so you can finally exhale. The philosopher Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. When you waste your time analyzing silence instead of building your life, you are wasting the opportunity to become someone who does not need to analyze silence at all. Here is an exercise, and I want you to actually try it, not just nod along. Take out a piece of paper, a real one, not a notes app. There is something about physically writing this down that makes it land differently. Write down everything in your life right now that has nothing to do with any woman. Your physical training, your work, your craft, your business, whatever you are building with your hands or your mind, your friendships that exist independent of romantic pursuits, your hobbies, the things you do even if no one were watching and no one would ever know, your health, your finances, your spiritual or philosophical grounding, whatever that means to you. Now look at that list honestly. Is it full or is it thin? Because if it is thin, that is not a character flaw. It is just information. It tells you exactly where your next few months of effort need to go, and it is not toward decoding a silence. It is toward filling that list until it is so substantial that no single person's attention or lack of it can knock the whole structure over. This is what people mean when they talk about a man who has his own life. It is not a euphemism for being busy or performing indifference. It is a literal description of someone whose identity has enough load-bearing pillars that losing one, even an important one, does not collapse the roof. When you have 5 pillars and one of them wobbles, you are uncomfortable. maybe even in real pain, but you are still standing. When you have one pillar and it is her, every wobble is an earthquake. Let us go back to the idea of mystery for a moment, because it is often misunderstood as some kind of manufactured trick. Say less, reply slower, be unpredictable, and watch her chase you. That version of mystery is manipulation dressed up in a costume, and it usually fails because manipulation has a shelf life. Eventually, the other person notices the strategy underneath the behavior, and the moment they notice, whatever attraction existed curdles into distrust. Real mystery is not a strategy. It is a byproduct. It is what naturally happens when a person is engaged in something bigger than the interaction in front of them. Think about someone deeply absorbed in a project they love. A musician mid-composition, an athlete in a training block, an entrepreneur building something from nothing. There is a magnetism to that kind of focus, and it has nothing to do with them trying to be mysterious. They are just occupied. Their attention is a scarce resource being spent on something that matters to them. And scarcity, real scarcity, is inherently more compelling than abundance. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's worth is just so much as the worth of the things he busies himself with. When you busy yourself with something meaningful, your worth becomes visible to everyone around you. A man who replies instantly to every message is not doing anything wrong morally, but he is unconsciously communicating something. He has nothing more urgent competing for his attention. Whether or not that is fair, it registers. Compare that to a man who replies within a reasonable window because he was actually doing something, training, working, living. And the difference is not about calculated delay. It is about one man's attention being genuinely occupied and the other's being entirely available. You cannot manufacture genuine occupation. You can only become the kind of person who has it. This brings me to something I think is the actual core of everything we are discussing. The goal was never to become unreadable to women. The goal is to become so anchored in your own purpose that whether or not she reads you correctly stops being the thing that determines your day. The philosopher Epictetus wrote that it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When silence happens, your reaction reveals everything. If you react with panic, you are telling yourself that your peace depends on her. If you react with steady calm, you are telling yourself that your peace is your own. I want to talk now about what happens on the other side of this, not the waiting, but the moment when you have to decide whether to stay or walk away. Because everything we have covered so far about silence and self-possession eventually gets tested in a much harder arena. A relationship, or almost relationship, where you are being treated in a way that does not match your worth, and you have to decide what you are going to do about it. Most men in this position do one of two things, and both of them are mistakes. The first mistake is exploding. Anger, accusations, an ultimatum delivered in a moment of hurt rather than clarity. That kind of confrontation rarely produces the outcome the man wants because it is driven by wounded pride rather than considered judgment, and people can feel the difference. The second mistake, more common and more corrosive, is silent endurance. Staying, saying nothing, absorbing disrespect while telling yourself you are being patient, being the bigger man, being understanding. That is not patience. That is self-abandonment wearing patience as a disguise. The alternative to both of those is something quieter and harder. Clear-eyed departure. Not a dramatic exit staged for effect. Not a door slammed to prove a point. But a calm, unhurried decision that this situation no longer aligns with what you are willing to accept. Followed by the willingness to actually act on that decision without begging for it to change first. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote that the wise man will not avoid the blow, but he will receive it calmly. And when the blow is a relationship that no longer serves you, the wise man receives it, acknowledges it, and walks away without looking back. Here is why this matters so much. It has nothing to do with strategy or making her want you back. It matters because a man who cannot leave a bad situation has, in a very real sense, given away his agency. He has told the world and told himself that his comfort is negotiable, that his standards bend under enough pressure, that if you just wait him out, he will eventually accept less than what he actually wants. That is not a message you are sending to her. It is a message you are sending to yourself every single day you stay somewhere you know is not right. And it compounds. Every time you tolerate what you know you should not, the version of you willing to tolerate it gets a little stronger, and the version of you that has standards gets a little quieter. Walking away when warranted is not an act of coldness. It is an act of self-respect so basic that most people, men and women, never quite develop it. Because developing it requires tolerating short-term pain, loneliness, uncertainty, the discomfort of not knowing what is next, in exchange for long-term integrity. Most people trade integrity for comfort without even realizing they are making the trade. They call it keeping the peace. They call it not overreacting. But peace built on the back of your own diminishment is not peace. It is erosion, and erosion is patient. It does not announce itself. It just slowly takes more than you agreed to give. I want to be careful here because there is a version of this message that curdles into bitterness, and I have seen it happen to men who started in the right place and ended up somewhere ugly. They learn about detachment, about not chasing, about walking away, and they weaponize it. They start treating every interaction as a chess match, withholding warmth as a tactic, punishing women for perceived slights with strategic coldness. That is not growth. That is the same neediness wearing a new mask, because a man who is coldly strategic is still organizing his behavior entirely around a woman's reaction. He has not actually detached. He has just detached with extra steps and a worse personality. The real marker of growth is not the ability to punish someone with silence. It is the ability to be warm, generous, and present when things are good and calm, clear, and unattached when things are not. Without those two states requiring any performance at all. That is the difference between a man who has done the internal work and a man who has memorized a script. The script cracks the first time real emotion shows up because scripts always crack under pressure that was not accounted for. Actual internal work holds because it was never dependent on the specific scenario in the first place. Let us talk about where a lot of this actually comes from, because I think understanding the origin makes the whole thing easier to actually apply rather than just intellectually agree with. Most men who struggle with this, chasing, over-explaining, collapsing at the first sign of distance, did not arrive there by accident. Somewhere along the way, love and attention got wired to safety. Maybe it was a childhood where affection felt conditional, where you had to perform to earn warmth, where withdrawal from a parent felt like the scariest thing in the world because your nervous system had not yet learned that you could survive it. Or maybe it was an earlier relationship that ended in a way that left a scar, teaching you that people leave, that attention is fragile, that you would better hold on tight because loosening your grip means losing everything. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. A nervous system that treats a woman's distance as a threat to physical survival rather than what it actually is, which is, in almost every case, just distance. Your body does not know the difference between "she has not texted in 6 hours" and "there is a genuine emergency happening right now." It floods you with the same stress chemicals either way. And that flood is what drives the chasing, the over-explaining, the compulsive checking of your phone. You are not weak. You are not broken. Your body is running an old program that made sense in an earlier context and no longer serves you in this one. Understanding that does not excuse the behavior, but it does change how you approach fixing it. You are not trying to fix a character defect. You are trying to retrain a nervous system, and that takes repetition, not willpower alone. Every single time you feel the urge to send the anxious follow-up message and you do not send it, every time you sit in the discomfort instead of resolving it immediately, you are teaching your body a new lesson. This feeling is survivable. It will pass. Nothing catastrophic happens if I let it exist for a while without acting on it. Do that enough times and the intensity of the feeling itself starts to shrink. Not because you have suppressed it, but because your body has finally learned it does not need to sound the alarm this loudly anymore. The philosopher Epictetus wrote that suffering is not a thing of itself, but our interpretation of it. When you reinterpret her silence as a test of your own steadiness rather than a rejection of your worth, you stop suffering. You start growing. This is why willpower alone rarely works long-term. A man who white-knuckles his way through not texting her back, gritting his teeth, counting the minutes, has not actually changed anything internally. He is just delaying the same behavior he would have done anyway. And the moment his willpower runs low, a bad day, a few drinks, loneliness at 11 at night, the old pattern comes roaring back, often worse than before because now there is shame attached to it, too. The actual fix is slower and less glamorous. Build a life substantial enough that the urge itself weakens because the nervous system stops perceiving her silence as a threat once it has enough other evidence that you are safe, resourced, and fine regardless of the outcome. Let us talk about what that life building actually looks like in practice, because go build a life is the kind of advice that sounds great and means almost nothing until you break it into pieces you can actually act on. Start with your body, because it is the fastest lever you have. Physical discipline, consistent training, sleeping on a schedule, eating in a way that is not self-destructive, does something that goes beyond aesthetics. It teaches your nervous system through direct physical evidence that you are capable of following through on commitments to yourself even when you do not feel like it. That capability generalizes. A man who has proven to himself, through months of showing up to the gym on days he did not want to, that his word to himself means something, carries that same proof into every other area of his life, including how he handles a woman's silence. He is not performing calm. He has actual evidence, accumulated through repetition, that he follows through, that he is disciplined, that he does not collapse just because something is hard. Move to your work or your craft. This does not have to mean building an empire. It means having something you are actively getting better at, something with its own momentum, independent of your romantic life. A man immersed in real progress towards something he cares about has less bandwidth for anxious rumination. Not because he is suppressing it, but because his attention is genuinely occupied elsewhere by something rewarding. Idle minds ruminate. Occupied minds, engaged in meaningful effort, mostly do not. Then there is your friendships, and this one gets neglected more than any other. A lot of men, especially once they enter their late 20s and 30s, quietly let their friendships atrophy and then wonder why a single romantic interest carries so much weight. It is because she is carrying weight that used to be distributed across 5 or 6 relationships and is now concentrated in one. Rebuild that distribution. Call the friend you have not called in months. Show up for people. A man with a full social world does not need any single person, including a romantic interest, to be everything. And that is not a strategy for attracting her. It is just a healthier way to live, regardless of whether it does. And underneath all of it, there is the question of purpose, the thing that gives your life direction even in the absence of romantic success. This is the hardest one to build and the one most men skip because it requires facing the question of what you actually want your life to be about, independent of anyone else's presence in it. But it is also the most important one because purpose is the pillar that holds up all the others. A man with a clear sense of what he is building and why has a reference point to return to whenever the noise of dating, silence, and uncertainty threatens to pull him off course. Without it, every fluctuation in a relationship becomes a fluctuation in his entire sense of self because there is nothing else anchoring him. Now, let us bring this back to the specific situation we started with. The silence, the slow reply, the woman who seems to be testing you, whether consciously or not. Once you have actually done the work I just described, something interesting happens. The question of whether she is testing you stops mattering nearly as much. Not because you have become indifferent to her. Indifference is not the goal. A man who is genuinely indifferent to everyone is not strong, he is just numb. It stops mattering because your response to her silence is no longer manufactured or effortful. You are not gritting your teeth and refusing to text her. You are simply living your life, and her silence is one small data point in a much larger, fuller picture rather than the entire picture itself. If she comes back, replies, re-engages, closes the distance, you are available and warm because warmth is not the enemy here. Neediness is. If she does not come back, you notice the disappointment. You let yourself actually feel it instead of suppressing it into forced positivity. And then you keep going because your life was never contingent on her decision in the first place. That is the entire shift. Not from caring to not caring, but from a fragile kind of caring that requires a specific outcome to survive, to a resilient kind of caring that can hold disappointment without being destroyed by it. I also want to address something that comes up constantly in this conversation because I think it deserves honesty rather than a comforting half answer. Is any of this about winning her back? About using detachment as leverage to make her want you more? Because if that is the actual motivation underneath everything you have just heard, I need to tell you plainly, it will not work, not reliably. And even when it appears to work, it produces a relationship built on a strategy rather than a genuine connection, which tends to collapse the moment the strategy stops being maintained. The version of this that actually holds up over time is not detachment as a tool to manipulate her interest. It is detachment as an honest description of a man who has built enough of a life that he is no longer desperate for any single outcome. The paradox, and it is a real paradox, not a trick, is that this kind of authentic security often does make you more attractive. But that is a side effect, not the goal. If you chase the side effect directly, you end up performing security instead of possessing it. And performance, as we already established, cracks under pressure and gets noticed eventually. If you chase the actual thing, building a life so solid that you do not need her validation to feel whole, the side effect sometimes follows and sometimes it does not. And either way, you are left with something more valuable than her attention. You are left with yourself, intact, regardless of what she decides. Let us talk finally about what it actually looks like to choose yourself. Because that phrase gets thrown around so often, it has started to lose meaning. Choosing yourself does not mean becoming selfish, closed off, or unwilling to compromise for someone you care about. Healthy relationships require compromise. That is not weakness. That is partnership. Choosing yourself means something more specific. It means that your baseline sense of worth, your daily peace, your ability to look at your own life and feel proud of what you are building does not depend on any external verdict. Not hers, not anyone's. It means you can enter a relationship fully, generously, with real vulnerability, precisely because you are not entering it from a place of deficiency, hoping the other person will fill a hole you have not addressed yourself. You are entering it from a place of abundance, offering something extra rather than begging for something missing. That distinction changes everything about how a relationship actually feels, both to you and to the person you are with. A relationship built on two people who each have full lives and are choosing to share them feels expansive. It adds to what is already there. A relationship built on one or both people trying to extract wholeness from the other person feels suffocating eventually, no matter how much affection exists at the start, because nobody can permanently supply another person's missing sense of self. That is not a job any human being can actually do for another, no matter how much they love them. So here is what I want you to walk away with. More than any specific tactic about silence or timing or replies, the question was never really, why did she go quiet? The deeper question, the one worth actually spending your energy on, is why does her silence have this much power over me? And what would need to be true about my life for it to have less? Answer that question honestly and act on the answer with actual discipline over months, not days, and you will find that the entire landscape shifts. Women who test, who pull away, who play games consciously or unconsciously, they still exist because that is simply part of how some people navigate uncertainty and vulnerability. But their tests stop landing the way they used to, not because you have learned to dodge them cleverly, but because you have built something in yourself that is not shaken by a test in the first place. The strongest man in any of these situations was never the one who figured out the perfect calculated response, the ideal number of hours to wait before replying, the exact words to make her chase him instead. The strongest man is the one who built a life so full, so purposeful, so anchored in his own values and his own daily discipline that he could walk into any of these situations and walk back out of them if he had to without losing a single piece of himself in the process. That man does not need mystery because he is not performing it. He does not need detachment as a strategy because he is already whole. And paradoxically, that wholeness is the very thing that makes him magnetic, not as a trick he is playing on anyone, but as the simple, visible truth of who he has become. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I'm here," and I will personally reply. And if it resonated with you, subscribe to become a part of it, and like the video if you enjoyed it.